Kumala se vesta. Kumala.
When it comes to organizations in BSD, there is no small number of them. Whether it's a genuine ensemble of various people with designated duties, or just some guy and his friends, the term is as broad as the Pacific Ocean itself. And these organizations, they don't just exist with a leader and its members, but a purpose as well, and a reason for its presence. I feel like we all pretty much understand the Port Mafia and the Detective Agency, or at least the gist of them. Like, yeah, the agency protects Yokohama during the day, while the Port Mafia handles the night, and the guild is a direct reference to crazy rich Americans flying over to other countries and staking their claim. All in all, as far as the understanding of those organizations as a whole goes, we're all pretty much on the same page. Except, of course, when it comes to one. The Hunting Dogs Ensemble had their big debut in Season 4 with its 4 members and a secret 5th one a few episodes later. I wasn't into BSD at the time, but judging from a few tweets I've seen from the past, I'm assuming their presence was well received, which is great. I personally enjoy them a lot. However, popping into the fandom space after watching the anime, I was confused to see people missing the point of them entirely. And I'm talking about daily Fukuchi hate posts, trashing on Teruko, and constantly babying the men in the ensemble, because of course they were, and it baffled me. It kinda seems like people think they're all innocent and sweet except Fukuchi and sometimes Teruko. But that can't be the case, right? Oh my god, that was the case. To discuss the Hunting Dogs, I'm going to be dividing this video into 2 main sections, the members of the ensemble and what their organization stands for. Now, we're gonna go into detail with every one of them, starting from the most detailed and well-written Hunting Dogs down to the flatter ones, and bear in mind this is only flatter by comparison to others, not me saying they suck. So, without further ado, let us discuss... Now, I could sit here and pretend I'm better than every BSD fan ever because I actually understood Fukuchi when I first watched the anime, and that anyone who doesn't like him is actually lower in intelligence than me because I'm so special. Or I could break it down simply. There are 2 main reasons people don't delve into Fukuchi, or even look at him twice. The first being the fact that he's victim to immature toilet humor, something so alien to BSD that is annoyingly jarring, and the second being that he's too old, to put it bluntly. The main appeal of BSD characters that made the franchise popular were its hot twinks, and Fukuchi, quite frankly, does not fit the bill on that one. Like, yeah, Fukuzawa is also an older man, but it's not really an affecting detail, you know? Like, Fukuchi is getting the proper old man treatment, with the mustache and the back pain and being the butt of "you're an old man" jokes. It is hilarious to compare how him and Fukuzawa are treated in the fandom because of that factor. But putting all that aside, Fukuchi is a phenomenally written character, all the way from his relationship with Fukuzawa to the way his PTSD affects his actions and beliefs. Chronologically speaking, we first meet Fukuchi as a temperamental little boy who challenges Fukuzawa in his dojo. From a young age, we know he's someone who loves to fight, and when someone finally is on par with him, Fukuchi is enamored by that and sticks to Fukuzawa's side. Now, a quick pause from the chronological narrative, we need to address the old man yaoi-sized elephant in the room, which is Fukuchi and Fukuzawa's relationship. The most important part of Fukuchi's character is Fukuzawa. It's that bond they formed that he clung to so hard to the point that Fukuzawa became part of him. And when the one person he was so reliant on refused to go to war with him, leading him to deal with what he saw alone, that is the point where Fukuchi broke. What he saw in the war was horrifying. His comrades dying in front of him came one by one, piece by fucking piece, until there was nothing left to destroy. And in the center of it all, hopelessness. He was too weak to save them. He was nothing compared to the enemy they faced. But why? What happened? Why did it happen? Why couldn't he do anything? What change occurred that broke him down from unstoppable to nothing? Fukuzawa Yukichi. See, it was his fault. If he had just sucked up his pride and joined him, this wouldn't have happened. They could have remained invincible, but the coward chose his own path. The coward left him. If there's anything BSD does so well that it could be considered artistry, it is depiction of trauma and the events that lead to it. In Fukuchi's case, we're seeing a stellar depiction of PTSD and how it's warped his mind to the point he's become the character we know now. To further clarify, let me use Atsushi, another character with PTSD, as a contrast. See, where Atsushi was tortured in the orphanage by the director, causing him to become self-deprecating and anxious, to put it lightly, and later met the agency that became a sort of mental support for him when he was struggling, Fukuchi started out alone. Then he met someone who he clung to his whole life, and when that someone left, his mind, desperate for an answer, provided him him someone to blame it on. Where Atsushi grew to hate himself, the person he considered the cause of his trauma, Fukuchi did the exact same. He blamed Fukuzawa, and what did he do, desperate for some closure and justice? He decided to ruin everything Fukuzawa worked for. And no, before you say it, Fukuchi is not evil. Instead, he is someone acting on his PTSD, someone who is so clouded with the guilt of failing to save his fellow soldiers and the brainwashing he's been facing from a young age. A quick look into his mannerisms confirms this, especially during the fight he had with Shinso Koku. His dialogues are phrased in a way that just makes him sound like a tired man, because that's what he is. Looking back at the scene where Fukuzawa rejects his offer to join the military, Fukuchi is acting off, isn't he? Like, we know he's arrogant, but we also know he values Fukuzawa dearly. So for him to scoff, turn his nose up, and make a jab about him actually having comrades is just so out of place for him. Like, that's his best friend ever. Why would he speak to him that way? And then when Fukuchi turns, there's this empty look on his face, as if he doesn't believe his own words either. This subtle look that was cut from the anime shows us everything that we need to know. It shows us that those words weren't really his words. They were what he was told by the many people who saw him as a hero. When we meet Fukuchi in the main story, we see that he's still being spoon-fed that glory. We see that people still hold him up to such a huge candle that later in the story, he's able to use that to manipulate the entire world using one order. That little radio thing in Fyodor's hand right about now in the manga, by the way. See, the condition of one order is that it only manipulates people's minds if their master, in a sense, uses it. And since so many people trust Fukuchi as a hero, he had the ability to control almost the entire world. Until of course he was punctured like a pincushion and yaoed into a book. Shout out to Poe and how he likely had to sit down with Fukuzawa and hear all about his first love to write the details as accurately as possible. He's a real one. Anyways, after being transported into the book, we get the most vital piece of Fukuchi's character. When he's on his own deathbed and when his mind is no longer muddled by the mission he failed. When he's in Fukuzawa's arms, we see the hero he could have been. In his last moments, Fukuchi explains his original intention of stopping all wars so no one would have to bear the pain of losing their comrades. The intention that got lost in his trauma until it was warped into a petty revenge plan. There is so much I love about Fukuchi as a character. It's his gentle mannerisms, his way of talking. An older man who wants nothing more to rest and for his mission to be over with. When Shinso Koku eventually kill him in the first fight they have, he outright says that the heavens refuse to free him of his mission before he comes back to life once more. And then when he dies at the hands of Fukuzawa, a death he is more than happy to accept, his body is used for that mission once more, never letting him rest even in death. And that is what Fukuchi stands for. A man who could have been a hero who was instead turned into a weapon for the very thing he wanted to destroy, who was manipulated by everyone around him until he was led to his death. I have seen a lot of bullshit on Fukuchi's character, especially when it's people believing he's well and truly evil and refusing to sympathize with him because of the fact he's simply not as good looking as the others. Look at Fyodor, who's a lot more fitting for the title of evil, even though he isn't, and I've made a video about that, but people will blindly defend him everywhere simply because he looks good doing it. The biggest frustration I have with the BSD fandom is that everything is either rose-tinted and sweet or well and truly sickeningly evil, when that's not what this manga is about. Say it with me, everyone. BSD isn't about good and bad, but growing from guilt and trauma. And in a story with that plotline, Fukuchi is something of a cautionary tale. He is what could have happened to Atsushi and Akutagawa in a scenario where they didn't meet each other and the former didn't meet people he cares about. He is what Beast's Dazai had the potential of becoming. And yet, despite being so well written, he's just a placeholder for a villain in fanworks. He's just the butt of old man jokes, and he's just there for people to go, oh, there's Fukuzawa's ex-boyfriend, haha. But even still, it's not Fukuchi who gets the least justice in the fandom, because you'll still find analysis posts on him and you'll still find people who are sympathetic towards him. No, that title goes to Lamau. Look at this scene. Look at the way Sigma owned this flop. Teruko won that fight, man. No, you don't get it. Sigma had her literally so desperate and was like shooting at her. It was epic. I mean, Teruko did poke out her ears and still get the upper hand, so she still did technically perform better. Oh my god, whatever. Sigma solos. Okay. To say that Teruko gets mistreated in the fandom is an understatement. We're experiencing levels of sexism that have only been seen once before in this manga, and that was to an eerily similar looking character. See, where Fukuchi is ignored, partly for a more valid reason, people don't like Teruko for a glaringly obvious one. But before I talk about that, let's play a little game called Character Creator. Now you know Chuya, right? Of course you know Chuya, everybody loves that guy. Now I want you to take Chuya's temperamental attitude, specifically the one from Stormbringer, and his snarkiness and put it all into a blender. Great, now take Rambo's more childish and fun attitude and add that into the blender as well. You see, this smoothie of traits pretty much gives us cool character, doesn't it? Someone who's strong-willed and determined and also unserious and childish at times. That's Teruko. That's literally Teruko. People will hate a female character for the same reason they will love a male character. You see, where Chuya's temper made him adorably aggressive in the eyes of many, it makes Teruko rude and obnoxious. Where they will adore Rampo's childishness and use it as a means of babying him, they will call Teruko annoying for it. And the reason for it is simple. People came to this fandom for their twinks. Teruko is not a twink. She is a woman, and therefore the sad reality is she holds no value in the eyes of the vast majority of the fandom. But blatant sexism aside, Teruko is a phenomenally written character, all the way from her speech to Sigma about how she's willing to fight for order even if it kills her, to her confession to Atsushi about how justice means nothing to her as long as she fights for what Fukuchi believes in. I was conflicted on whether I want to put her in second or third in terms of writing, but after chapter 115, I'm holding out a singular ray of hope that this isn't the end of her arc and we'll be able to see more of her sooner rather than later. And before I get into Teruko's character, I think we need to address the elephant in the room here, which is how old is Teruko exactly? Now, exact age, I'm not sure, but I believe from the research I have done personally that she's an adult, but let's break that down first. In 115, we are told that Teruko forcibly aged up her body at just a few months to fight in the war. This is where the translators fucked up. Where Teruko says she was 12 when Fukuchi found her, they used the wrong grammatical tense in the translation and resulted in the fandom arguing about that line because what else do we know how to do? Thanks for nothing, guys. Anyways, the text says she was 12 when Fukuchi found her, and since it's been roughly 14 years since the war that they participated in, she would be in her 20s, around the same age as the hunting dogs, which makes sense as to why she's in that ensemble at all. Also, this is another supporting factor, but she refers to Atsushi as a kid in one scene, further proving that yeah, she's not one. And by the way, this is no excuse to sexualize her. See, Teruko still presents herself as a child, and that's where we see a great portrayal of age regression as a coping mechanism. Teruko never had a childhood from when she was a few months old to 12 years. She was constantly at that battlefield from the beginning, and to cope with that loss, she uses her ability to remain a child physically and treats the hunting dogs as her caretakers and brothers. When she's on the job, she's acting like a proper child, crying over a culprit that was a little too easy to beat, exploding up part of a casino when the manager denies her, and using the hunting dogs as her personal means of transportation. She regresses her age both mentally and physically, using her ability to her advantage in this case. See, despite Teruko's temper and her strong will, in her head she's still a little girl because she never had the chance to be one before this. And the hunting dogs being accommodating to her is beyond sweet. I don't think we talk about that enough. In fact, we don't talk about the hunting dogs as an ensemble enough, but that's why we're here today. Another really good part about Teruko is her unwavering loyalty. I mentioned her conversation with Atsushi earlier, but I think it deserves a larger emphasis. Teruko is not loyal to order, but Fukuchi specifically. She knows about the decay of angels, she knows what they're doing is wrong, and yet she could never hate Fukuchi because he saved her. And despite that, she still killed him on his orders. That's a scene I don't think I've seen anyone talk about ever. Like, not even a single tweet or Reddit discussion about the impact of that scene, which is so frustrating to me. She literally killed the man she would follow to the ends of the earth if he told her to, and that's how loyal she is to his words. But I cannot talk about that too much in this segment. We'll save that detail for later. For now, let's move on to the next member. Now, before the angry tomatoes come at me for the placement of Tachihara and Teruko, let me say that I believe they're interchangeable. Where Tachihara has had a character for a longer time, Teruko makes up for that lost time with the sheer quality of her writing and basically puts them on the same par. Now, for Tachihara, who is by the way my favorite hunting dog and my second favorite character, we see another depiction of mental illness, in this case imposter syndrome. But first, let's discuss him as a character. Tachihara has been a part of BSD since the beginning, but he's never been anything special, understandably. Like, okay, rebel boy attitude, piercings, box dye red hair, and he fleshed in the background pretty well for that, I think. But then, as Asagiri does, we got this total 180 on his seemingly nothing character. See, we learned during the Hunting Dog's escape arc that Tachihara's brother Shunzin was a part of a war that Yoshino was healing people in, and arguably the most important part to her arc. And before I elaborate, I see people treating him like he's a saint, which is really funny to me because he literally killed himself and blamed a little girl. Like, I know it wasn't his fault and his mind was driven to desperacy by the trauma, but it's so funny to me for no reason. I am so sorry. Anyways, I want to talk about the Tachihara brothers dynamic for a bit. By the way, I'll be addressing them by their given names for a while here, so sorry if I pronounce them wrong. Anyways, we learn from Michizo's backstory that he feels drowned under his brother. See, Shunzin was admired by his parents for his bravery, for fighting in a war and dying as a martyr in the battlefield, at least from what they've been told. Shunzin was good and perfect, and by contrast, people began nitpicking at Michizo after his death because why did the brave soldier die and not the child that, quite frankly, wasn't worth much? Because of that, Michizo struggles with how to feel about his brother. Shunzin did die brave, but how was he supposed to live up to that? This is where he began his work of petty thievery, a way to deviate from his noble brother until, of course, he was discovered and recruited by the Hunting Dogs. We learned that after Ango was discovered by the Mafia, the government needed another spy, and that's why Michizo was sent in his place, which I think is really interesting. Where Ango had multiple identities and takes part in different sides of the government fuse and keeps up the facade, Michizo's mind breaks down at the idea of simply two different masks. Ango and him have some wonderful parallels in the manga, but there's one main difference. Ango puts justice aside when it comes to the matter of one person. He will fool the government, use illegal resources, and defend people considered terrorists, all to make up for what he did to Odasaku and Dazai. But Tachihara, he has something stronger in him, an unwavering sense of justice that he gained working for the Mafia. To put it bluntly, he isn't one to follow orders blindly. The Mafia orders him to think while the Hunting Dogs require him to follow blindly, and Tachihara's sense of justice does not allow him to do that. And that, mixed up with his feelings about his brother and who he is in comparison, it builds into this great narrative for imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is basically the feeling of being inadequate where you are and feeling you don't belong or deserve what you have due to that inadequacy. And we see that mostly in the scene where Tachihara is fighting with himself to differentiate who he is, mafioso or hunting dog. See, in his fight with Fukuchi, he admits he wouldn't have minded being a hunting dog if Fukuchi hadn't done what he did and disrupted the justice they stood for. His most iconic line being that his orders make him who he is. Tachihara knows he's meant to be a soldier, not for fighting blindly in a war, but for what he believes in, for what separates him from his brother. Now, I know that things are looking pretty bad for him right now in the story, but I'm pretty sure he's fine. This is BSD after all, and we wouldn't lose a character so easily. Also, fun fact, Tachihara and I are actually married, and my most toxic trait is that every time I see any ship art of him, I must squint and put myself in the other person's place. I'm sorry, but I love him too much. But moving on, it's time to discuss... Now, sitting down to write the script, I was ready to glaze past Jouno and Tecchou pretty easily, since to me they never stuck out and their writing wasn't really writing in my head, but I'm happy to say I was wrong, especially in Jouno's case. See, where we have some great portrayal of mental illness in the other Hunting Dogs, to me, the fact that Jouno and Tecchou were as flat as they were seemed almost jarring in comparison, and to an extent, that point still stands. Like, yes, they're not the most interesting characters in the ensemble, but still genuinely well written as side characters. See, I'm someone who believes that having a personality doesn't make a character, you know? So this is why I like them more, considering we have some stellar motivations for the both of them and flaws we can read about that don't seem too out of place. Focusing on Jouno, I have to admit I really disliked him when I first read the manga for his attitude and overall didn't enjoy his presence, but looking back, I see that that's the point. Jouno plays himself off as someone who is uncaring of people and their feelings, outright telling the ones he considers wastes of his time to die without a care. But then, when he is cornered by Fukuchi, we see a side of Jouno not seen by many. A side of him that values protecting the innocent more than bullying little girls, which is honestly great fun. You might also be wondering why I've lumped Jouno and Tecchou in the same category, and might even think it's because there's not much to them, but it's actually because their characters are somewhat reliant on each other. We see this especially in Jouno's case during the fight Tecchou has with Kenji. In his fight, he talks about how most people misunderstand Jouno, and this is really gay for one thing, and really telling for another. It tells about Tecchou, and he's not as rock solid as he seems to be, but more sentimental with how he values his comrades despite his more deadpan demeanor. Another great thing about the pair of them stems from just one line, which is by the way my favorite line in the entirety of BSD.
Start. I'll have you know, Tecchou, that of every single member in our squad, I most certainly hate you the most.
Hate?
Why?
Because your soul is entirely lacking in artistry.
The phrase, "your soul lacks artistry," is such a heavy-handed line that I had to sit down and think about it after finishing this specific episode. When Jouno says it, he's directly referring to the scene where Tecchou cuts down the trees in his path instead of avoiding them. This scene tells us about Tecchou and how he does things in the most straightforward way possible, and how that irritates Jouno. See, Jouno is someone who values the freshness in his coffee beans due to his heightened senses, which further alludes to him being a little bit more sensitive than he lets on. It also tells us about their contrasting personalities, which also comes into play for their views on justice. See, where Tecchou believes in justice with mercy and kindness, Jouno does not. Where Tecchou would hold someone accountable for their crimes with more delicacy, Jouno believes in severe punishment for those very crimes. Mercy is an interesting theme among the two. The thing is, neither of their views are incorrect in regards to it. Tecchou believes in a certain kindness to all people, and we see that in the way he talks to the cafe owner. Jouno believes in a much more harsh approach to criminals, which is also valid because punishment is needed where punishment is due. Both of their views are contrasting but alike, and we see that in their personalities too. Where Tecchou is kinder, Jouno is much the same with a thicker layer of harshness to himself. Tecchou is straightforward about his emotions. He doesn't put up a face, and that's why his soul lacks artistry to Jouno. There isn't anything to him but who he is, a just and honest person. And despite that frustration, they work well as comrades with what I think is a really interesting dynamic that is deeper than meets the eye. Of course, they have their own individual personalities too. I enjoy Techou's self-deprecation when he believes he has failed someone, reflecting that he holds himself just as accountable as he would any other person. And I love Jouno's stone-cold exterior and intelligence, especially how he uses it. The hunting dogs as a whole are really well written in their members, and I feel like we can all agree to that at this point. But then that begs the question: what do the hunting dogs symbolize in the story built on symbolism? What is their presence as an organization supposed to tell us, where every organization in the franchise stood for something more? Well, it's literally in the name. The hunting dogs isn't just a neat little nod to the fact that they're hunting the stray dogs, but also it tells us about the members. See, hunting dogs are used by huntsmen to catch prey. They are given an order and will follow it even as that prey cowers and begs for its life. Hunting dogs blindly follow their master, and the hunting dogs in BSD do much the same to an extent. We see this in the members and how they never question Fukuchi in the hunt for the agency, even after the world begins rallying for them. Their master gives them an order and they will follow it blindly. All except one. One man who questions that so-called justice, one who doesn't consider himself a hunting dog. And after Tachihara, the others begin following suit. Jouno hears Fukuchi's heartbeat in that scene. Tachihara tries to prove the hunting dog's innocence and turns his back on those orders. Tecchou doesn't do that, but when Jouno goes missing, he ignores the justice he's been fed and puts Jouno above it. Teruko has known about Fukuchi's injustice but will still blindly follow him. And yet, she lets Atsushi go during the battle at the airport scene because despite what she tells herself, she cares about real justice. But then, why now? Why did they only wake up once Tachihara went down? Well, before that, we've been told that the hunting dogs underwent surgeries to artificially strengthen their bodies, making them superhuman along with having their respective abilities. And once those surgeries cease to happen, they die. Teruko tells us as much, and we see in that line of dialogue that she isn't even scared of that fate, but ready to accept it if any of them were to disobey. And yet, when Tachihara goes down, the dogs are more loyal to their pack than they are to their master. They symbolize corrupt justice and bound orders to them by soulless beings ready to wreak havoc on the world, and how, despite that, nothing can erase the natural instinct for humans to do good. Thinking back to this video, what is the one thing all the hunting dogs have in common? Is the fact that deep down they believe in real and true justice and must push it aside. In fact, even their original uniform being green played into this. See, where it was changed to red because it was too controversial, the green being outright the same shade group as the uniforms of totalitarian soldiers was the fucking point. That is what the hunting dogs were supposed to parallel, but it was washed away in favor of avoiding controversy. And another thing I find interesting is Fukuchi in this equation, where the organization he keeps as a front is built on striving for order. The decay of angels, the thing he believes in, is a symbol of chaos, the world's natural order. The hunting dogs are the complete opposite of that in the most negative of ways. The organization stands for cruelty and the justice that is only ever applied to the cruel higher-ups that don't give a shit about humanity. Look back at Teruko and Sigma's conversation. Teruko outright knows she's a pawn to this game and blindly follows suit. This makes her the ideal hunting dog. This makes her who she is, a willing puppet ready to die for the man who saved her. A willing puppet forced to kill the man that saved her. This is what the hunting dogs are about, and even though we all want them to move on after Fukuchi as their own organization, that is not what should happen. Realistically, the only way to stop this cruel cycle is for the hunting dogs to cease to exist entirely. Not the members, of course, but the organization itself. Corrupt justice can never be undone, no matter how many lives you save. And Fukuchi, he's not to blame. He was built on that corrupt justice, artificially conditioned by his many supporters to take that stand. To replace one tyrant with another would just continue the cycle. Realistically, the hunting dogs must cease to exist, and the thing is, they can. Tachihara could go back to the mafia, and the others could find something that resonates with their beliefs, their interpretations of justice. So next time you talk about the hunting dogs, bear in mind that none of them are evil, but none of them were allowed to do any good in their organizations. This strong hold on them is what makes them Bungo stray dogs, symbol of corrupt justice.
Whoa, don't you dare click off yet. Don't you go to the comments, alright? I need you to listen to me right now. If you're watching this video, I need you to listen to me. Did you know that in 2024, this year that hasn't ended yet, 292 Turkish women were murdered by their husbands, by their boyfriends, or by strangers on the street? Did you know that Turkish women are afraid of going out in the daylight? Did you know that? Like, in the daylight, not even at nighttime. They're scared 24/7 for their lives when they're outside their homes, and sometimes even in their homes. Need to remind you, 292. Do you know how much that is? In 1 year, and that year hasn't even ended yet. And now you're probably gonna say, oh, Cash just wants us to donate, or Cash is saying we have donated, where's the link? I don't want you to donate. I'm going to leave a link to a thread. I'm going to ask you to read that thread. I'm going to ask you to read that tweet, and I'm going to tell you to retweet it. That is literally it. No money. I don't want your money. And I want you to spread these hashtags that I'm going to be putting on the screen. That's all you have to do. You don't even have to donate money. You just have to raise awareness for these women. These women need our help. They need their voices heard. And while we're on the topic, let's talk about donation. If you can't donate money to people in Palestine, that is fine. I am someone who's also not financially stable enough to donate. So I'm going to be leaving a link to Arab.org. You just have to click the screen over there. Just click the screen. Donate if you can, but if you can't, just click that screen, and that's all you need to do to help these women. Women and men in Gaza both are still going through hell. Their pain is not over. So just do that. That's all I'm asking from you guys. That's literally it. On a lighter note, thank you for watching. Please listen to the things that I just told you to do instead of just ignoring them. I'm asking you guys to help me, and I'm asking you guys to help Turkish women. I'm asking you guys to help people. That's it. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.